Yeah, this is an AQ Worlds upload. Keep scrolling. No, wait. So as one may guess, I've been going back to Flash games a lot recently in between my indie reviews, and one I remember really liking back in the day was Adventure Quest. I played a lot of the original Dragon Fable and AQ Worlds, the MMO version of the game. You've played a Flash game before, you know the story at this point. Just like anybody else who plays AQ Worlds in current year, I played it a decade ago with the other Adventure Quest games. Really love this game's aesthetic. The story is jumbled and weird, and each saga outside of the ones that tied together into each story arc seem to be individual storylines, and yet they also reference other ones expecting you to have completed them, making it even more confusing. But boy, for me there was not many pieces of media that try to fill in the role of cool and absurdity in a fantasy setting as much as Adventure Quest. It's sort of a guilty pleasure of mine because from a distance people might see it as a dumbed down Warhammer filled with random humor and dated pop culture references, and yeah, you'll get a lot of that. But this video isn't about why I find Adventure Quest games in of themselves such a strangely enthralling setting. This is about one specific person. I was very on and off about it, and my memory's a bit hazy on some topics, but the Chaos Lords, the main event of the game, are one I'm fairly familiar with, despite the fact I never beat them all as a kid. For those not familiar with AQ Worlds, I'll give all the context necessary in a bit. For those who are, this might be a weird one for you, because you already know who I'm going to talk about, and already have questions. Well, don't worry, we'll get to those too. Each Chaos Lord had their own sense of agency, goal, and moral code that they did or did not abide by. Some found it in greed, aspiration, desperation, madness, and honestly for some of them there's more than what's on the surface, which is an extremely low bar to hit for an antagonist, but as a kid this was pretty meaningful to me. I've thought to myself to maybe go back and fight them all one day. And I've wondered to myself which Chaos Lord is actually my favorite. It was hard to think of one because, to be frank, it's been decades since I've last rushed through most of these enemies, but on reflecting on their backstories again, I only grew to respect maybe a third of them all. So it was pretty easy competition after that. Ultian was off the board because I don't respect him as a Chaos Lord. All my respect for him was instead developed before that point. Good gang represent. Iodao is another good one, but there's not a whole lot outside of his willingness to resist the controlling powers of chaos to the point of madness, which is commendable, but it's sort of the same boat as Altium. Cassandra is peculiar enough to warrant interest due to her very nature and inception as a Chaos Lord, taking the mantle of the first Ninth Chaos Lord and using her abilities to attempt to face Dragath and even being released to try to stop him at a future point. It was a tragic but understandable downward spiral of circumstances with the death of another family member in her tribe following the chaos, the corruption of her twin, her slaying of him, and reaching the point where she finds herself now alone in this mantle with nobody to understand what she's going through. She's up there, but not my favorite. For example, her anger towards the hero is really silly, stating that they've done a lot in their position but not enough, and that has led to the suffering in the present, which might have been a valid motivation if she elaborated on how the hero hasn't performed well enough. On the account that I've defeated over half the Chaos Lords up to this point, she definitely has to make a case for such an absurd accusation. No, that position belongs to the 11th, Maximilian Lionfang. Now that everybody's sufficiently confused on who the hell that is or why the hell I'd pick him, let's go through a bit of history. In 2009, like most people, I didn't really know a lot about Lionfang, other than that he was a high-ranking soldier in the army of King Altion the Good. He would at some point reject the Alliance, take the Swordhaven forces loyal to him, and create the Golden Onslaught. He then captured all the good Orion heroes and prepared to torture them until they were convinced that he was in the right. You see, back in the day, Lionfang's primary purpose was the plot hook for a future Chaos Lord and to establish fairly early on that despite the name, the faction of good can harbor bad people. So this is why my foggy memory of him wasn't very complex, and 2009 Lionfang honestly seemed to come down to,
"It should be you on this boat, not me! I'm based in red-pilled! You're a liberal cuck!"
He then had a fog surrounding his tower that stopped all living beings from entering unless they had an amulet to prevent the poison. So, Shadowsight is the forces of evil that Swordhaven, the forces of good, had aligned with recently, right? That's what the entire fuss is about. Well, I feel the need to mention Lionfang put down this toxic cloud that prevented any living beings to enter, when knowing that his main enemy has a population made predominantly of undead. Yeah, better luck next time, Lion Boy. Once cornered, he is repeatedly offered a chance to surrender, and Altian even offers him his position back in the ranks, but he refuses so fervently that he smashes a hole through the tower and falls to what was suspected to be his demise. Then the Chaos Twins start to persuade him to alternate powers. So, from the context given of what I knew, Lionfang was a self-righteous furry who threw a logistical tantrum over the truce in an act that was so strategically nearsighted, I genuinely wonder how he got the rank general. And I'm supposed to be defending this guy? Well, this is where things start going down a path where this character went from a passing thought and an occasional cameo and an example of how Swordhaven could still have bad eggs to a warpath of a man painfully unyielding in his stance and name of righteousness and honor. That's gonna need a little explanation, huh? Now, for longtime viewers, you may be thinking that this is gonna be another Dar case, and I'm afraid not. This character's gonna be far more difficult to play devil's advocate for by the fact that Dar was good-natured and Lionfang, despite his allegiances, has no such restraint. Even before he becomes a Chaos Lord, I'm pretty sure he tried to assassinate the literal Christmas spirit at one point. But despite this, Lionfang has consistently maintained a strong code of honor through the series. Telling his enemies of his plan seems like a terrible idea and an act of arrogance, but this is a move they made dictated by his honor, honesty above all. That's the difference between him, some forces of evil, and even some allies such as his brother. He will not resort to treachery. He told them outright that the alliance was off. He gave up the sucker punch for that. Of course, it was very underhanded of him to capture his allies, but he had done that for the sake of trying to get them onto his side. Despite his actions, he's not doing this in any attempt to assassinate them. When Gravelin's in his tower, he immediately goes after her, but he shows zero sign of feigning a surrender. He rebels against the king because he worries the sickness of the corruption is weakening his wisdom and judgment. Even when given the ultimatum by Dracath, he becomes a Chaos Lord, but Dracath has to disarm him and then persuade him, and yes, he is one of the Chaos Lords who becomes one willingly, but it's all worth noting that he told Dracath to his face that he is going to do everything in this power and in his power to kill him. And then we see a few months have passed where he finally drops by Falgard, tears through their armies, kills some of their ancient protectors, taking an artifact of their goddess and leaves. The hero pursues Lionfang only to find that he picked up a decoy and the hero has the real thing. Although they want to use it on King Altion because he's very important to the alliance, Altion denies it and insists that it's used to save Lionfang. Later in the story, the hero tries to use it on Lionfang after he was lured out from the death of his manticore, his beloved pet, and he has the hero in his grasp by the neck. He's essentially won at this point. He thanks the hero and lets them live, as is demanded by his honor, as the hero had inadvertently saved his life. If he had used the decoy on Dracath, he would have surely failed. The hero chases Lionfang to his sky fortress and he tries to use the tear of the mother on Dracath after summoning him, only for it to not work because it would cure somebody of chaos, but Dracath has become pure chaos. And then he takes on the hero, upset that he believes that the hero had tricked him at some point. After the defeat, he's cleansed of the corruption due to the rain being produced from the relic and falls to his death as the fortress also dissipates. The hero survives, and the new Primarch of Falgard tells them that even the diluted version of the goddess's tears cleanses the taint from the average person and makes them more resistant to the taint of chaos. And that's where the chapter of the 11th Chaos Lord concludes. So let's rewind back a bit because I want to go over his actions in a bit more detail. Lionfang himself in his saga is often limited by his code of honor. This code dictates a sense of honesty above all else, to an overt degree where he will tell his enemies of potential weaknesses and spare mortal foes that he has in his grasp if they had saved his life, even if inadvertently. This makes complete sense with his stubborn personality when you think about it. Lionfang was brought down to this path because he had no other choice when everything was crumbling down around him. Of course, he wasn't forced into this position by anyone but himself. He was given ample opportunity to accept the truce needed to continue and return to his cushy job as a general of Swordhaven. But because of his strict stance against evil, he wouldn't allow himself to make such a compromise. Which is why it may seem hypocritical that he made a compromise with Dracath and became a Lord of Chaos, but it couldn't be further from the case. What Lionfang did in the realms of compromise would be the equivalent of taking the mantle of a warrior for Gravelin, looking her in the eyes and saying,
I'm going to kill you and then kill you again.
I bring this up because, like evil, Chaos would have insidious temptations to try to steer him towards something far more menacing. Let's not forget Lionfang took this mantle willingly, which grants him much more free will and less madness, but he was still in the realm of Chaos with not only Dracath, but Xing and Zhang, who were more than eager to manipulate him in the past, and are well known for their ability to puppeteer people. And despite all of this, His goal from the start has never changed. He had attacked Falgard because it held the Darkblood secret he discovered from the start. He only conspired against Drakath and had only attacked those that were evil or trying to stop him from doing so. I have no doubt in my mind that the Forces of Chaos tried to push him to go attack the Forces of Evil aimlessly to try to empower good, or to tell him that since he was one of the last good people with a strong enough will to do what needed to be done, that he should try to dethrone King Altion and become king himself. But no such thoughts ever even crossed his mind. He never swerved from his objective, not for glory, but for good. To really send this point home, I want to take some time to explain just how strategically advantageous what Lionfang did as the Chaos Lord was. Falgard is a city of the Darkblood, a species that is neutral aligned, refuses to get involved in the conflict at all, and the reason they did was because they had a failsafe that could destroy chaos from anybody, the aforementioned Tears of the Mother. They're also fervent isolationists, and would be hostile towards the hero if they weren't saving their town. So it's safe to assume they won't provide resources to the Alliance either. So Lionfang's actions in the city has had no real negative repercussions towards the Alliance of good or evil. In fact, him coming in as a Chaos Lord and tearing things asunder with his Chaos Onslaught had actually developed a resentment towards him and Chaos by extension. His death means that he won't even be able the chance to return to the side of good or the Alliance, meaning there was no political schism between Darkblood and the Alliance over his punishment. As mentioned earlier, the Tears of the Mother serving as rain had made the Darkblood resistant to Chaos as well. So now there is a recently saved town that was neutral in the war and has recently lost its safety net from Chaos, has a newfound deep resentment towards Chaos, and now has an inherent advantage against it. Any actions Falgard takes after this would be in the benefit of the Alliance, and as an extension, would be detrimental to Chaos. Someone could argue that was Paratrakas' plan all along because he wanted nothing more from Lionfang than the 11th Chaos Beast to be awoken, but even then his plan was pretty dumb if that's the case, because he gains nothing else from this Chaos Lord. Drakath could have taken that place out himself. What are the Darkblood gonna do? Use the Tear of Mother on him? He's immune, and they failed using it on the exact scenario they needed the most. They were a non-threat to him and a potential ally, but Lionfang's actions further discouraged that, as they now become more difficult to face with their resistance to Chaos and more difficult to induct into his army as well. Now with all that on the table, I get to finally pull up my Golden Onslaught propaganda. Maximilian Lionfang, a general of King Altion the Good. His tolerance for evil and his enabling of it was minuscule. His rebellion against the king was not out of disdain for the crown or a sense of superiority. It was from the belief that his liege's judgment was clouded by the disease that ailed him. So he worked with the truce until the opportunity arrived that he could destroy the chaos that struck his king sick to begin with. Once given the opportunity to defeat the foe greater than them, he turned against evil, but not like a coward, taking a chance to sucker punch shadow-sized forces. No, rather than showing them that he was just as petty, he would rather take the time to reason with his allies and to inform evil that the truce is coming to an end, and so their doom was impending. His methods of persuasion were faulty and immoral, yes, but they showed the desperation he had to have the forces of good see reason. He doesn't strike them down for becoming allies with evil, because he knows that they're still truly good, and that there would be no battle on the save without them. Given more time, Lionfang would have been able to show them the truth in his actions, a luxury he could not afford. His skills and leadership are not depicted here, but it becomes clear how much respect he harbors in the troops that he had gathered, as the Golden Onslaught were those loyal to him and his ideals. And although some had turned on him when seeing the hero in Gravelin's perspective and nuances, many had remained loyal to Lionfang, even after his turn to chaos. The forces of the Golden Onslaught, an army of unwavering conviction towards the righteous, were convinced to join Archlord Lionfang in the path of a Chaos Lord, and to cull the parts of his army that had shown weakness in turning on him and the cause. For them to take such actions in his name required unquestionable loyalty. Through Lionfang's dark campaign in Falgard, we see him taking the course of action he had intended from the start, but with the power and independence to do it on his own in his warband. Despite the whispers and delusions of grandeur that would have been created for him, despite the ideas that could have been planted by himself from the grown resentment of the disgusting thing he had to become to face chaos, his thoughts had never swerved off of the objective. to get the tears of the mother, to kill Dracath, and to finally annihilate evil. Lionfang truly was a man with an iron will. Although he would ultimately fail and pay for his rash decision making, the results of his actions as a Chaos Lord had only the potential to benefit the war against Chaos. And that is why I'm now in Lionfang themed armor, kneeling before a statue I made in Photoshop. It isn't actually there, but let's pretend it actually is, and showing my respect for a general who would do what it would take to stop evil, a warrior that would not bend on his morals, and a man who would willingly take the path to hell with no promise of return, simply to kill the devil himself. And that is why Lionfang is the best Chaos Lord. Anyways, that's all I have for now. I hope you'll all be here for my upcoming indie shindig, and I hope you all have a good day, and be safe.